Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In March 1981, the medieval courthouse of Lübeck, Germany, became the scene of a shocking act of vigilante justice that would captivate a nation. When Klaus Grabowski stood trial for the brutal murder of 7-year-old Marianne Bachmeier, no one expected what would happen next. Anna's mother, Marianne, walked into that courtroom with a hidden Beretta and 8 bullets of vengeance. What followed was not just a murder, but a mother's ultimate act of retribution that would force Germany to question the very nature of justice itself. Tonight, we dive into the dramatic story of Marianne Bachmeier and the day a grieving mother became judge, jury, and executioner. On a cold March morning in 1981, the historic Hanseatic city of Lübeck, Germany, became the setting for one of the most dramatic acts of vigilante justice in modern German history. The medieval courthouse, with its imposing Gothic architecture, was packed with spectators, journalists, and legal professionals, all gathered to witness the trial of Klaus Grabowski, a 35-year-old butcher accused of an unthinkable crime. The air was thick with tension as Marianne Bachmeier, a 30-year-old single mother, entered the courtroom. To the casual observer, she appeared composed, dressed in a dark winter coat, her blonde hair neatly styled. No one could have predicted what was about to unfold, an act that would spark a nationwide debate about justice, revenge, and the limits of maternal grief. 7 months earlier, Marianne's world had been shattered when her 7-year-old daughter, Anna, failed to return home from school. The events that followed would forever change not only her life, but also German society's perspective on crime and punishment. Anna Bachmeier was a vibrant, creative child who loved to draw and play with her friends in the narrow streets of Lübeck's old town. She was Marianne's 3rd child, but the only one she had raised, a fact that would later become significant in understanding the depth of their bond. On May 5, 1980, Anna left for school as usual. When she didn't return home that afternoon, Marianne began a frantic search. Hours turned into days as police combed the city. Then, on May 16th, investigators made a horrifying discovery in an abandoned building. Anna's body, hidden beneath a pile of debris. The medical examiner's report revealed that she had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Police quickly identified Klaus Grabowski as the prime suspect. He lived in the same neighborhood and had a disturbing history of sexual offenses against minors. In 1973, he had undergone voluntary chemical castration after serving time for child molestation, but had later undergone hormone treatments to reverse the procedure. These details would later fuel public outrage and debate about the treatment of sex offenders. During his confession, Grabowski offered a twisted narrative, claiming that Anna had tried to blackmail him by demanding 5 Deutsche Marks to keep quiet about an alleged indecent proposal. This absurd assertion about a 7-year-old child only added to the horror of his crimes and intensified Marianne's grief and anger. As the trial began that March morning, Marianne sat silently among the spectators. In her purse was a Beretta .22 caliber pistol she had purchased on the black market. She had arrived early, choosing a seat with a clear line of sight to where Grabowski would be sitting. As the proceedings began, she watched him enter, escorted by guards, appearing almost casual about the proceedings. According to witnesses present that day, Marianne waited until Grabowski was seated. Then, in a moment that would be forever etched in German legal history, she stood up, drew the pistol, and fired 8 shots. 7 bullets struck Grabowski in the back. The sound of gunfire echoed through the high-ceilinged courtroom, followed by chaos as people screamed and dove for cover. "I wanted to see his face when I shot him," Marianne would later tell investigators. "I wanted him to know why he had to die." The shooting was over in seconds. Grabowski slumped forward, dead before medical help could arrive. Marianne remained standing, the weapon still in her hand, making no attempt to flee or resist as court officers rushed to apprehend her. When they reached her, she simply laid the gun down and allowed herself to be taken into custody. The immediate aftermath was a scene of confusion and shock. Judge Helmut Nustede, who had been presiding over Grabowski's trial, later described the moment. "In all my years on the bench, I had never witnessed anything like it. The sound of the shots, the smell of gunpowder, and the absolute silence that followed, it was surreal." News of the shooting spread rapidly through Lübeck and then across Germany. By evening, it was the lead story on every major news network. The German public, already horrified by the details of Anna's murder, now faced a moral dilemma. How should society judge a mother who takes revenge into her own hands? Marianne's background began to emerge in the media coverage that followed. Born in 1950 in Lübeck, she had experienced a troubled youth. She had her first child at age 16, giving it up for adoption. A second child followed at 18, also given up. When Anna was born in 1973, Marianne was determined to keep and raise her, despite being a single mother in conservative 1970s Germany. The relationship between mother and daughter was described by friends and neighbors as exceptionally close. Anna was not just Marianne's daughter, but her redemption, a chance to prove she could be the mother she hadn't been to her first two children. This context would become crucial in understanding the depth of her loss and the extremity of her response. As Marianne awaited her own trial in custody, public opinion was sharply divided. Some viewed her as a vigilante who had undermined the justice system, while others saw her as a grieving mother pushed to the breaking point. Letters of support flooded into the prison where she was held, and demonstrations were organized calling for her release. The case forced Germany to confront difficult questions about justice, revenge, and the adequacy of the legal system in dealing with crimes against children. It also sparked debates about the treatment of sex offenders and the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs. The fact that Grabowski had been able to reverse his chemical castration became a particular point of controversy. The story of Marianne Bachmeier would continue to captivate Germany for years to come. But in those initial days following the shooting, one thing was clear. This was more than just a murder in a courtroom. It was a tragedy that touched on the deepest aspects of human nature: love, loss, justice, and revenge. The question now was how the German justice system would respond to a mother who had taken the law into her own hands in the most dramatic way possible. As Marianne Bachmeier's own trial approached in 1982, Germany found itself deeply divided over her actions. Legal experts debated whether she should be charged with murder or the lesser offense of manslaughter, while psychiatrists attempted to assess her mental state at the time of the shooting. The prosecution faced a unique challenge: how to pursue justice when much of the public sympathized with the defendant. The trial began on October 30th, 1982, at the same Lübeck courthouse where she had shot Grabowski. This time, Marianne sat in the defendant's chair, facing charges of premeditated murder. The prosecution argued that the purchase of the illegal weapon and her methodical approach to the shooting indicated planning rather than an impulsive act of emotion. During the trial, Marianne's attorney, Rolf Bossi, one of Germany's most renowned lawyers, built a defense around the concept of overwhelming emotional distress. He argued that his client had been in a state of extreme psychological trauma, triggered by both her daughter's murder and the additional torment of Grabowski's false accusations against Anna during his confession. Dr. Klaus Mielke, a prominent forensic psychiatrist who evaluated Marianne, testified about the profound psychological impact of losing a child to violent crime. He explained to the court how the trauma had been compounded by Grabowski's attempts to blame Anna, stating, "The defendant experienced what we call double victimization. First the loss of her child, then the perpetrator's attempt to tarnish her memory. The trial revealed previously unknown details about the days leading up to the shooting. Marianne had visited a shooting range to practice, using a different weapon than the one she would ultimately use. She had also methodically planned her entrance to the courthouse, knowing exactly when and where Grabowski would be seated. These details complicated her defense's argument that the shooting was an impulsive act. Perhaps the most compelling testimony came from Marianne herself. Speaking in a clear, steady voice, she described the months following Anna's death. "I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, imagined her final moments. When Grabowski claimed Anna had tried to blackmail him, something inside me broke. He had not only taken my daughter's life, but was now trying to take her dignity." The courtroom fell silent as she continued. "I knew what I was doing when I shot him. I wanted him to die. I wanted him to never hurt another child. I wanted him to never speak another lie about my Anna." Her raw honesty about her intentions presented a challenge for her defense team, who had hoped to portray the shooting as an act of temporary insanity. As the trial progressed, witnesses from Anna's life painted a picture of the close relationship between mother and daughter. Her teachers described Anna as a bright, well-adjusted child who clearly benefited from a loving home environment. Neighbors testified about Marianne's dedication as a mother, how she worked multiple jobs to provide for Anna, and how the two were rarely seen apart. The prosecution, led by State Attorney Heinrich Wille, faced the difficult task of arguing for justice while acknowledging the extraordinary circumstances of the case. Wille stated, "While we can understand Frau Bachmeier's grief and anger, we cannot condone taking the law into one's own hands. A civilized society must maintain order through legal channels, not vigilante justice." The trial also brought to light disturbing details about Germany's treatment of sex offenders in the 1970s. Expert witnesses testified about the controversial practice of allowing convicted pedophiles to undergo hormone treatments to reverse chemical castration. This aspect of the case led to significant reforms in how such cases would be handled in the future. As the trial neared its conclusion, the media attention intensified. Journalists from across Europe descended on Lübeck, and the case was featured in newspapers and television reports worldwide. The story resonated particularly strongly with parents, many of whom admitted they could understand, if not condone, Marianne's actions. On March 2, 1983, after 4 months of proceedings, the court reached its verdict. In a decision that reflected both the unique circumstances of the case and the public's conflicted feelings, Marianne was found guilty of manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm, rather than murder. The court sentenced her to 6 years in prison. Judge Gerd Kramer, in delivering the verdict, acknowledged the extraordinary nature of the case. While the court cannot condone vigilante justice, we recognize the extreme circumstances that led to this tragedy. The defendant's actions, while illegal, stemmed from unimaginable suffering that no parent should have to endure. The sentence was considerably lighter than what would typically be handed down for a shooting in a courtroom. The judge cited several mitigating factors, including Marianne's clear remorse, her previous clean record, and the extreme psychological pressure she had been under. The verdict was seen as a careful balance between upholding the rule of law and acknowledging the unique circumstances of the case. The public reaction to the verdict was mixed, but generally accepting. Many viewed it as a fair compromise between justice and mercy. Marianne's supporters had hoped for an even lighter sentence, while legal purists argued it sent the wrong message about vigilante justice. However, most agreed that the case's exceptional circumstances warranted special consideration. During her imprisonment at the women's facility in Lübeck, Marianne received hundreds of letters of support from around the world. Many came from parents who, while not condoning her actions, expressed understanding for her motivation. She used her time in prison to complete her education and undergo intensive psychological counseling to deal with both the loss of her daughter and the aftermath of her actions. The case led to several important changes in German law and society. The treatment of sex offenders was reformed, with stricter controls placed on rehabilitation programs. The case also sparked a broader discussion about victims' rights and the role of the justice system in providing closure to families of murder victims. Marianne Bachmeier was released from prison in 1985 after serving just under 4 years of her 6-year sentence, receiving early release for good behavior and demonstrating significant rehabilitation. Upon her release, she faced the challenge of rebuilding her life under intense public scrutiny. The media continued to follow her story, and she became a reluctant symbol of the complex intersection of justice, revenge, and maternal love. In the years following her release, Marianne made a series of dramatic life changes. She moved to Nigeria in 1988, seeking to escape the constant attention in Germany and hoping to find peace in a place where her story was unknown. There, she married a teacher and spent several years working in a school, trying to build a new life far from the painful memories of Lübeck. In a rare interview given to German television in 1994, Marianne reflected on her actions. "When I look back now, I see a different person. The woman who walked into that courtroom with a gun was consumed by pain and rage. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm also not sure I could have acted differently at that moment. The loss of a child changes you in ways that are impossible to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it." Her time in Africa proved to be temporary, and by the early 1990s, she had returned to Germany, settling in the small town of Rheinbeck, near Hamburg. Her life took another turn when she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 1996. The diagnosis prompted her to break her long silence and share her story more completely with the German public. In a series of interviews conducted during her final years, Marianne spoke candidly about the complex emotions that had driven her actions. She revealed that in the months following Anna's murder, she had contemplated suicide multiple times. "The only thing that kept me going was the thought of confronting Grabowski," she admitted. "I wanted him to face what he had done, but when I saw him in that courtroom, showing no remorse, something snapped inside me." During this period, she also worked with journalists to document her life story, resulting in several articles and a book that would be published posthumously. She spoke about her difficult childhood, her early pregnancies, and how Anna had represented a chance at redemption. "Anna was my miracle," she said. "She made me believe in myself as a mother, as a person. When Grabowski took her, he didn't just take my daughter. He took my chance at proving I could be the mother I always wanted to be." The medical records from her time in prison, released with her permission in her final years, revealed the depth of her psychological trauma. Dr. Eva Kruger, who had counseled her during her incarceration, noted, "Marianne carried not just the grief of losing Anna, but also tremendous guilt over her actions in the courtroom. She struggled to reconcile her role as a mother who should protect life with her actions as someone who had taken a life." As her illness progressed, Marianne made arrangements for her final resting place. In a decision that moved many who knew her story, she requested to be buried alongside Anna in the same cemetery in Lübeck. She passed away on September 17, 1996, at the age of 46, leaving behind a complex legacy that continues to provoke discussion about justice, revenge, and the bonds between parent and child. The aftermath of the Bachmeier case led to lasting changes in German society. The treatment of sex offenders was significantly reformed, with stricter monitoring and more comprehensive rehabilitation programs. The case also influenced how the German justice system handles victims' families, with greater emphasis placed on providing psychological support and keeping them informed throughout legal proceedings. Legal scholars continue to study the case as an example of how justice systems navigate situations where public sympathy conflicts with the letter of the law. Professor Johannes Weber of the University of Hamburg Law School notes, "The Bachmeier case forced us to confront difficult questions about the nature of justice. When does punishment become revenge? How do we balance the needs of victims' families with the requirements of a civilized legal system?" The story has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and even a feature film. Each new examination of the case brings fresh perspectives on the complex moral and legal questions it raised. The 2013 German film The Revenge of Marianne Bachmeier sparked renewed public interest in the case and led to important discussions about vigilante justice in the age of social media. Today, both Marianne and Anna Bachmeier's graves in Lübeck continue to receive regular visitors, often marked with fresh flowers. Their story has become part of German cultural memory, a tragic reminder of how love, loss, and justice can become hopelessly entangled. Local residents say that parents sometimes bring their children to the cemetery, using the story to discuss difficult questions about right and wrong, justice and revenge. The case remains relevant in contemporary discussions about criminal justice reform, victims' rights, and the treatment of sex offenders. As societies continue to grapple with these issues, the story of Marianne Bachmeier serves as a powerful reminder of the human costs of crime and the complex emotions that surround justice and revenge. In the end, Marianne Bachmeier's story is more than just a sensational crime narrative. It's a deeply human tragedy that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice, morality, and the lengths to which a parent's love might drive them. As one of her final journal entries read, "I have lived 2 lives, one before Anna's death and one after. In neither of them did I find the peace I was looking for, but perhaps my story will help others understand the true cost of violence, both for victims and those who seek revenge."